Today, we're heading to New Orleans, in the year 1927. The French Quarter was humming with life, iron-laced balconies, shutters swinging in the breeze, and the scent of jasmine and spilled whiskey hanging in the thick, humid air. Folks sitting out on the stoop, talking in that syrup-thick drawl, Cajun, Creole, English, French, and Spanish, all blended together like some kind of gumbo. And if you wandered into any little cafe off of Royal or Decatur, you'd smell that famous New Orleans roasted coffee, mixed with chicory, deep, earthy, bitter, and chocolatey. The tradition of mixing chicory in with coffee goes all the way back to the Civil War, when coffee beans were scarce. New Orleanians found that roasted chicory root made their morning cup go a lot further and gave it a little bit of a distinctive bite that they would end up lacking, and they still do. You can't get a regular cup of coffee in New Orleans without it. That old soul of the city don't change easy. The buildings were already old by then, the iron balconies dripping with ferns, Spanish courtyards tucked behind tall gates, bricks so worn they'd seen generations come and go. The kind of place where even the walls seemed to whisper if you listen. Creole cottages leaned a little to one side, paint peeling under the heat, shutters flapping like they were sighing with age. And then 1927 brought one of the worst natural disasters this country's ever seen. The Great Mississippi Flood. Rains fell, rivers swelled, and levees failed. Hundreds of thousands were driven from their homes across the Delta, and New Orleans was spared the worst of it, but only because the city's leaders made a controversial decision. They dynamited the levees downriver, flooding poor rural parishes to save the quarter. And if that wasn't enough to stir the political pot, remember, they were knee-deep in prohibition. The booze were illegal, but you know as well as I do they were flowing like water. You just had to know the right door to knock on. Speakeasies, jazz joints, and backroom bars were alive and well. Folks drank their bathtub gin and danced to the horns and drums of Jelly Roll Morton and King Oliver. The law might have said one thing, but the French Quarter had a mind of its own. There had been epidemics, too, in the years before, yellow fever, cholera, and typhoid. Folks still whispered about them, still remembered who they'd lost, and the cemeteries stood quiet, tombs stacked high like little stone cities for the dead, and the living had learned just how close that world could be. And behind all the beauty in the city was poverty. Families crammed into one-room apartments with leaky roofs and rats the size of kittens, kids running barefoot through alleyways, their laughter mixing with the moan of a saxophone somewhere down the street. Some folks did what they had to do to get by, others did what they wanted, and left the devil to sort it out. Prostitution was thriving, especially in the shadows, even after it was officially shut down in 1917. The women didn't disappear, they just moved further into the cracks of the city. Madams knew how to keep the law looking the other way. Men in suits and Sunday shoes snuck through the side alleys looking for company. In New Orleans, sin danced right alongside of what looked like virtue, but there were great divides. Fine clothes brushing past threadbare coats. Jazz musicians playing their hearts out for pennies, while the rich folks clinked glasses above them. So by the time 1927 rolled around, New Orleans had seen her share of trouble and triumph. She was old, beautiful, and broken, but still wild as a buck. And right into the middle of all that history, music, and craziness, something awfully dark unfolded. And Darlene's gonna tell you all about it today. So grab yourself a cup of strong chicory coffee and sit down and hear a story.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is
Hard Times and True Crimes. So we want to shout out a few of our supporters for the week. We want to thank Ashley Sloan.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yep, she bought us coffee, and Christian Moore.
Thank you so much. That is awesome. We love y'all.
Yes, we really appreciate that support so much.
Yes, we do. Y'all keep us going for sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you know what we forgot is our true crime trivia.
Oh, man. I didn't bring it, of course.
Let me see if I can find one.
Yeah.
I'll ask ChatGPT.
Perfect.
Which infamous criminal was known as the Killer Clown because he often performed at children's parties dressed as Pogo the Clown?
John Wayne Gacy.
Ugh, yes, you are correct.
He makes me sick.
I know, it is.
He's one of the harder ones to hear about. Like, I won't watch any documentaries or anything about him.
Me either. And even when they come up on the TV, it just totally creeps me out.
Me too. I'm the same way with Jeffrey Dahmer.
I'm with you on that. On either of those.
There's a case that Curtis wants me to cover, and it's real dark like that. And I just have such a hard time researching that because it gets you in a dark place.
It really does. And there is one that one of our listeners has sent in a while back, one of our Canadian listeners.
Yes. Oh, which one?
I don't remember the name, but I've looked at it and I'm like, this would be a really interesting one to cover, but I don't know if I can handle the material.
I'll
send it to you.
Yeah, do that. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story today, fresh out of New Orleans. Well, not fresh because it's actually an old one. You know, I like old stories.
Yes.
So this is about Theresa, nicknamed Teeny, and Henry Moity. They were married, did not have a great marriage, unfortunately. It was very messy. There was lots of jealousy, heavy drinking, and, screaming fights, that kind of thing. They had 3 children together, and that'll sometimes make it hard to split up. It should make it hard to split up, I guess, in my opinion. By the time October 1927 rolled around, things were pretty much broken beyond fixing, at least as far as Theresa saw it. This is interesting. So Theresa's sister, Leonide, was married to Henry's brother, Joseph. Sisters were married to brothers. And for a while, all 4 of them, Theresa, Henry, Leonide, and Joseph, lived together with their 5 children in a tenement apartment at 715 Ursulines Street, right there in the French Quarter.
That was a crowded apartment.
Yes, it was. 9 people. But Joseph and Leonide, they had already split up. He had taken their 2 children to live with his sister, leaving Leonide behind with Henry and Theresa there in New Orleans. After Joseph left, things kind of went from bad to worse between Theresa and Henry. So with her husband and children gone, Leonide didn't really have anybody to answer to anymore. And Henry was convinced that she had some kind of evil influence over his wife. Depending on who you'd ask back then, the sisters were either scandalous women of the night or they were just 2 young women trying to survive in a tough city. The truth was probably somewhere in between. So there was lots of talk of infidelity and even some whispers about prostitution on a small scale. Just quiet enough to kind of stay under the radar, but loud enough to get neighbors talking. But before it all went bad, Theresa and Leonide were just 2 backwoods Louisiana girls born into a French Creole is it Creole?
Mm-hmm.
Creole family in New Iberia. That's in Louisiana.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Mm-hmm. Basically a French city as well. So they came from a hardworking family with a whole bunch of mouths to feed and not much money to go around. And so it was the kind of upbringing where you learned to take care of yourself early because you had to. No choice,
Yep.
Theresa was the younger of the 2, and newspapers would later say that she was sharp, quick-witted, funny, prettier than average, and she had the kind of restless spirit that she just didn't like to sit still for too long. And I was like that when I was young. The same way. I always wanted to be on the go. Leonide, the older sister, she was more grounded in the beginning. A little tougher, a little more protective, probably from taking care of her siblings and everybody else for most of her life. She was the kind who would look out for you, even if it meant doing without herself.
And what's the age difference between the sisters?
2 years.
2 years.
Sometime in their late teens or early 20s, both sisters married into the Moity family. Leonide to Joseph and Theresa to Henry Moity.
My dad's two brothers, married sisters. Yes. So on my mom's side, I had that. And then on my dad's side, there were two that married sisters. So, yeah,
Okay.
both of my uncles were married to the sisters.
So lots of double cousins.
Yes.
The two brothers were Cajun boys from a Creole neighborhood in New Iberia. Joseph, he was quiet and steady. Henry had a little bit of a fire in him, if you know what I mean. He'd been a sailor for a while, worked in the Gulf, and even spent some time in the military before being dishonorably discharged. So this was the roaring 20s, a time of prosperity, jazz, and big dreams. Cities were booming, and New Orleans was no exceptions. There were jobs to be had, people moving in, seeing how prosperous it was and hoping to get themselves a little slice of the pie.
Mm-hmm.
The couples packed up and they moved to New Orleans, hoping to build a better life for themselves. So that's when they all ended up, moving into that cramped tenement apartment there. So Theresa and Henry, they had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. And then Leonide and Joseph, they had 2 children. They had a boy and a girl. And for a little while, it felt like they were doing all right. Cramped quarters, though, like you were saying. When they first got to New Orleans, the plan was solid. They were going to work hard. They were going to save money. They were going to build better lives for themselves and their kids. Henry, he had become a butcher by trade, working long hours in the heat and blood, bringing home just enough to scrape by. Joseph was more of a jack-of-all-trades type guy. So he did everything, whatever paid, from handyman work to deliveries, cleanup jobs, odd things here and there, and whatever he had to do to keep food on the table. And they were trying. But New Orleans was fast and full of temptations and everything from alcohol to women to men flashing their money around, willing to spend it, and everything in between. And it didn't take long before all 4 of them, Henry, Joseph, Leonide, and Theresa, started getting sidetracked. The drinking picked up. The money started disappearing faster than it came in. And there were rumors about other men, other women, just all types of things. And money was tight enough that the women had to take in extra sewing jobs to get by. And things were just tense in that little apartment. The breaking point came when Joseph found out that Leonide had been seeing another man behind his back. He was furious and he did not take it quiet. And somehow he found out that had not been the first time.
Oh, okay.
So she was just disappointed in the life that they'd created. She did not love him anymore. She wanted more. Eventually, Joseph finally, I guess, decided it really is over. And so he packed up their 2 kids and he moved back to New Iberia with his sister. And so now Leonide, with her husband and children gone and on her own for the first time ever, or, definitely in a long time, with no husband, no kids, no responsibilities. It was just a new kind of life. She got a wild hair. Yes. And Henry hated it. And he hated her.
Oh.
Because now Theresa is saying she's not happy.
Right. It rubbed off on her.
Yeah. And according to Henry, there was a rumor that she was actually seeing their landlord. In his mind, this was all his sister-in-law's fault. She was filling his wife's head with ideas about leaving him and, being independent, and it was just ruining his life. Theresa wasn't even taking care of the kids like she had anymore. As far as Henry was concerned, she had become a whole different person. He said he'd come home from work and there wouldn't be any supper on the table. Sometimes he'd go out and buy the kids some beans and rice from a little place down the street, just so the kids would have something in their bellies before they went to bed. Other times he'd be so mad he'd just get drunk and rant and rave, or he'd walk out of the house and just leave.
Oh, and those poor kids in the meanwhile.
But deep down, Henry really didn't want to lose her. He did love his wife. He asked Theresa, one night he just kind of opened up to her and said, why don't we just move away? Just the two of us and the kids. He told her that he loved her and he knew they could make it work if they tried. He said they could leave the house, leave Leonide, and go somewhere and just start fresh with, just their family. But what Theresa said floored him. She told him he could leave. He could take the two girls, but she was keeping the boy and staying there with her sister.
So why were the boys younger? I'm sorry,
No,
the girls?
The girls were older, actually. But she had always kind of favored the boy. Mm-hmm.
Oh, but how sad for those girls.
I know.
To know that your mom
thing.
Says that. Good gracious.
I know.
I'm not thinking too highly of these women.
It's just sad. But that right there, that was the crack that kind of split things wide open. Henry just didn't know what to do with that. He just kind of broke after that. He started telling people that his wife had turned her back on him, that Leonide had poisoned her, had ruined their marriage, taken his family from him. He was telling people they're living in sin, they're mocking him behind his back. He just kind of got worse. He got darker. He stopped shaving. He wasn't eating right, drinking more. He kind of walked the streets, muttering, going from bar to bar, talking to anybody who would listen about what was going on. And if nobody was listening, then he was talking to God. At least that's what he believed. He told people that he couldn't sleep, that he was having visions, and that the Lord was speaking to him about his marriage. And the way Henry saw it, he didn't have a wife anymore. He had a betrayer, somebody who was just laying down every night under the same roof as him, but living her own life.
Right.
And so now, before we go any further, I'm going to give you a heads up that what Henry does next is graphic and disturbing. So if you're sensitive to descriptions of violence, just skip ahead a minute or two. On October 27th, 1927, it was a fall, but it was still hot.
Because it was New Orleans.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was just one of those thick, humid nights. Henry came in from work that night, and once again, the kids were hungry. They hadn't eaten. There was no supper on the table, and didn't look like Theresa was worried one bit about what they were going to eat. He was so mad, he ended up just leaving the house and bought a bottle of wine. He drank every drop of it, and somewhere between that first swig and the bottom of the bottle, he made up his mind that he was going to kill her. He later said that he had begged her time and time again to stop running around, but she was not going to change. So he went out again, and this time, not for wine, he went to a hardware store and bought a cane knife that was used to cut sugar cane. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those. They're known for being super sharp and very long. Almost looks like a machete.
Okay.
Yeah. And he also bought some rope.
Oh, no.
He came back to the house and snuck in and hid the rope and the knife behind the kitchen door. And then he left again. Went back out, drank some more wine, let the buzz settle in. And when he came back that second time, Theresa was already in bed. He said that he could hear her snoring and that she was actually sound asleep. So he walked into the kitchen, grabbed that knife, and took it into the bedroom with him. He laid it at the foot of the bed, and then he crawled in bed beside his wife. He snuggled up next to her for a few quiet minutes, knowing that this was going to be the last time. And then he reached down, he grabbed the knife, and cut her throat so violently that he almost took her head off.
Mercy.
He later would say that he didn't even think she had ever woke up. I really hope so. He said that he had only intended to kill her, but then as he looked down at his wife's dead body laying across the bed, he heard Leonide rustling around in the other room. And that's when Henry had the thought that Leonide was the one who had started this whole thing. And she was the reason why his marriage had fallen apart. And so he grabbed that cane knife and went after her. Henry said Leonide didn't put up much of a fight. She was caught off guard, probably confused, maybe even still half asleep. And he turned the blade on her and cut her throat. Now, another reminder, this next part is graphic as well, especially if you're sensitive to post-mortem violence.
Okay.
So he looks around at all the blood, the bodies, and kind of try to figure out what to do. He drug out 2 steamer trunks and went back to the bodies and started to cut them up. He decapitated both of the women. He severed their arms, legs, and fingers to make their bodies small enough to cram inside the trunks. When he was done, he put their bodies into the trunks and closed the lids and took that rope and tied the trunks shut. He woke up his children and flagged down a taxi.
And did he take the trunks with him?
No, he left them there.
He just tied them up and left them there.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids don't know what's happened.
No.
Okay, good.
The kids don't know.
That's horrible.
The next morning, Thursday, October the 28th, 1927, Nettie Compass, a cleaning woman who was their neighbor and somebody that Henry would sometimes hire to come in and clean up the house. And she'd sometimes watch after the kids, cook them a meal. And so she actually showed up that morning. She didn't even make it past the doorway before she saw blood all over the floor. It looked like something really violent had happened there, but she didn't want to be dramatic. And so she walked on in, but then as she went into the bedroom, it looked like a slaughterhouse.
I bet.
The mattress was covered with blood. There was just blood everywhere. It was so bad that she almost had a nervous breakdown. She just ran out into the streets screaming and hollering for help.
Imagine walking in and finding that.
I'm talking like there were fingers on the bed.
Oh, traumatizing.
Yes. So 2 men nearby heard her and they came running. One of them flagged down the police. And when the officers got there and stepped inside, of course, they're not prepared either. Inside the apartment, they found those 2 small travel trunks, each one packed with the butchered corpses of these 2 young women.
Man.
There were blood-soaked mattresses, severed fingers on the bed and floor. The bathroom was covered in blood. I think that's where he probably tried to clean up. One of the victims had a deep gash in her back, and inside the wound, they found a gold wedding band.
Oh, so he did that he staged that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
It was buried in her flesh. And then little pieces of human remains were discarded like trash just throughout the entire apartment. And of course, the cops are realizing that the victims are Theresa and Leonide Dwyer, both in their mid-20s, 25 and 27 years old.
Wow.
Both young women, young mothers, sisters. And what was done to them was so brutal that it just shocked everybody on the force and everybody who found out.
Takes a lot of anger, some boiling, simmering for a long time anger to do something like that, I would think.
Yes. And interestingly enough, before the cops got there, a reporter had happened to be out in the streets. And so he was able to get a lot of photos.
Oh, no.
And yes.
And he printed those.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. While police are still processing the nightmare, Henry had gone. He had taken his children to his brother Joseph and his sister's house. He told him exactly what he had done and that he said, I've killed Theresa and Leon.
And Joseph had been married to Leonide.
Yes.
Okay.
And then he hugged his kids and said goodbye and walked out the door.
Oh, no. I know where he's going. Well, maybe I don't.
You might. By the time the police put the pieces together, they weren't just looking for Henry. They were also looking for Joseph because they realized, he had been married too, and there was infidelity there, and she was dead too, and so it didn't look good for either brother. They thought maybe he'd helped, and maybe Joseph came forward. And he told them the whole story and told them that Henry had come back confessing, dropping off the kids. But they arrested him. While they waited, they needed to make sure that they had at least one of them in custody. The press jumped on the story. I mean, it was grisly, scandalous. It was sex, sin, and they could not print it fast enough.
Sure.
And the whole city was watching. You know, the police were starting to think maybe Henry had committed suicide.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
Because they couldn't find him anywhere. No sightings, no trace of him. They thought maybe he'd thrown himself into the Mississippi. Maybe he had wandered off into the swamps to die. They just didn't know. But then a tip came in that he might be staying at a boarding house on Camp Street right there in New Orleans. His plan was to make a getaway by ship to head out of town before the law could catch up to him. But Superintendent Healy radioed out to all 7 ships scheduled to leave the port that day, warning the crews to be on the lookout for a man with very dark, bushy hair, dark brown eyes, and a tattoo on his arm with a flower and a lady's face, and then another of a nude woman. Sounds like Curtis.
I wasn't going to say anything, but you brought it up.
It was pre-Jesus, y'all.
Yeah. I'm glad you made that note.
It was Saturday, October 29th, just 2 days after the bodies had been found, when a break finally came. Crewmen aboard the freighter Jim docked down in Lafourche Parish, and they had spotted someone who did not belong. The man had begged his way onto the ship under a false name, saying that he was just looking for some work. But one of the crew had seen the paper and recognized his tattoo. So they called the Lafourche Parish Sheriff, and just like that, Henry Moity was in custody. First, Henry denied everything. He said that he had not killed his wife or his sister-in-law, and that he had been there, though, but had not been the one to do the killing. He blamed a red-headed sailor, a mystery man never named, never found. Henry said that this sailor he had befriended and that he decided to kill the women for his sake, as a favor, as a friend, and out of loyalty to him because of the way Henry had been treated by Theresa and Leonide. That he had confided in this man one night at a bar. And so I guess the man was like, well, hey, let me just go back and kill them for you.
Yeah, that dog don't hunt.
And so Henry claimed he did not and would not have ever lifted a hand against them. He said that he only helped afterwards. The man had tried to get him to dismember the bodies to fit them in a trunk, but he said he would not dare do that. But he did pack the pieces of their bodies into the trunk.
Okay, so
yeah,
he would never have dismembered them, but he would pack them.
Exactly. Because, that's better.
Right.
But he was so afraid. That's the only reason why he did. So he finally does make a full confession. He was cold, though. No emotion, no regret. He totally felt like a victim.
Unfortunately, you can't just go around murdering people who, don't treat you right.
Exactly. In his confession, Henry didn't just admit to the murders. He laid out his reasons.
That makes me... So he felt justified.
Well, he said, though, that his mind had been warped by alcohol and betrayal. He was driven to it because Theresa was planning to leave him, and he believed she was having an affair with their landlord, Joseph Caruso. He said she was neglecting their children, and that her sister, Leonide, had been corrupting her mind, encouraging her to live wild, to run around, all the things. But even with all his rambling, he made one thing real easy for them. It was premeditated.
Yeah. Actually, it sounds like he thought through the murder. He just didn't think through his alibi and his story afterward very well.
Right. Yeah. So.
But it was definitely premeditated.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then the crazy thing was, the Nettie Compass that had found the bodies? She actually came forward. Well, they interviewed her. And she was saying that he had told her a couple of nights before, he said that they had been arguing like really bad, him and the women. And then he said the same night, later on, a couple of hours later, saw all three of them walking out the door, laughing, seemingly fine. But then later that evening, she saw the whole family leave the apartment together. Henry, Theresa, Leonide, the kids, and they were all in good spirits. They were smiling and everything seemed back to normal. And I think that was kind of common with them. They would argue really hard and then things were fine.
Yeah, and I know people like that. I think, too, when you grow up rough like that, I think that is very common.
It is.
You fight loud and hard, and then you're fine.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But just before they were walking out the door, he comes back and pulls Nettie aside. He was really good to her. I will say that. And I think Nettie kind of felt sorry for him because she saw also she was kind of like his buddy. And he pulled her aside and said, "Don't be scared if you hear the kids crying early in the morning."
Oh, no. And what'd she say to that?
Well, she said at the time it was odd, but she just didn't think wasn't thinking murder. But then after what happened, when she walked in the next morning, that was the first thing that came to her mind. And she felt so guilty, but she didn't know what he was saying.
Right. Hindsight's always 20/20. She didn't have a context for it.
Exactly.
At that time, yeah.
Now, we'll say, the newspapers, instead of centering their articles on the horror of what had happened to Theresa and Leonide, they kind of focused on the brothers, on Henry's claims that the women were unfaithful, that they were living wild, running around. And it kind of generated sympathy for him. At first, there was outrage over the brutality of the murders.
Yeah.
But then people were starting to feel sorry for him as more details, I guess, about the women's lives were coming out.
Yeah, it kind of did turn him into a victim and them into the cause.
Yes.
Which back then, I think, too, was very common in the papers.
Yeah. And the victims are kind of being put on trial now.
Right.
In the newspapers.
Yep.
And it painted him as kind of like a broken man driven to madness by betrayal, that kind of thing. So at trial, the physical evidence, though, told its own story.
Yeah.
I mean, it was there. The coroner took the stand and testified that the killer who decapitated Mrs. Henry Moity knew enough not to try to cut through bone, but to cut through the joints. The wife of the defendant indicated that it had been skillfully removed. And
he butcher. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. When you said that earlier in the episode, and then when you started talking about him going to buy that blade, in my mind, I thought, oh, and he's a butcher. He knows what. Yeah.
Yep. And that's exactly, it was very skillfully done. And so, the defense tried to paint him again as a man just driven to insanity by jealousy or by, I guess, betrayal, all of those things. But the prosecution was like, this is a tale as old as time.
Mm-hmm. It is. It really is.
And they felt like he needed to face the firing squad.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the end, though, Henry Moity was found guilty in both cases because they tried him separately. He was found guilty in both cases. He wouldn't face a firing squad, but he was sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences. And so he would spend the rest of his life locked away.
So he didn't face the death penalty?
No.
That is very surprising.
Especially back then.
I know.
It is. Henry Moity started his sentence at Louisiana State Penitentiary on July 6th in 1928, because his story is not over yet.
Oh.
No. You would think it would end there.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
And you'd think with him being convicted of 2 horrific murders, dismembering the bodies, leaving fingers on the bed and blood in the bathroom, that he'd be locked down tight. But no, turns out Henry ended up with a whole lot of freedom. By 1934, he was a trustee.
Oh my goodness.
That meant he was given special assignments, roamed around with hardly no supervision, and got a lot of leeway. And he was friends with, he was not an average prisoner. He was very close with the warden. I mean, they were buddies. I think everybody sympathized with them. And in the summer of 1944, Henry was out running an errand, just, a routine trip to the post office, and he decided he was done serving his sentence. He wasn't going to come back. So he flagged down a taxi, told the driver to take him to Hammond, Louisiana. And from there, he hopped on the Illinois Central Panama Limited and rode it straight to Chicago. And just like that, he was gone. The wildest part, the superintendent over the prison camps at the time didn't really seem that worried about it. He said he figured Henry would be back on his own soon enough. And he'd already served 16 years, and with the right lawyer, he'd probably get pardoned on account of temporary insanity.
So he just felt like it was...
Right. So, yeah.
He felt like he maybe just served enough time. That's something you don't hear every day.
No.
That's weird. Was he wearing prison clothing when he flagged down this taxi?
Maybe not. I don't know if he's found,
like as a trustee, maybe he didn't.
So, yeah, I'm not really sure about that. But, I mean, he managed to somehow blend in and escape. 2 years later, in 1946, Henry's little getaway did come to an end. He was stopped by police in St. Louis, Missouri, acting suspicious. And when they asked who he was, he told the truth. He said, "I'm Henry Moity." And just like that, he was sent right back to the Louisiana State Penitentiary.
So the warden essentially was correct. He did make his way back.
Yeah. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it.
Oh.
That's not the end either. Despite the murders, despite the escape, despite everything, the Louisiana Pardon Board recommended his release. And on March 26th in 1948, Governor Jimmy Davis signed the pardon. 21 years after the killing of his wife and sister-in-law in cold blood, Henry Moity walked free.
Wow. He must have been quite a compelling character.
Yes. So he decided that he was going to head out west to start all over because he hadn't had the greatest luck in the South. So he went out to California in 1956 inside a Los Angeles hotel room. Henry did what Henry does. He turned violent.
Oh, no.
He shot his girlfriend, Alberta Orange, in the chest after an argument about her wanting some money to buy some clothes. The bullet punctured her lung, but by some miracle she survived. Arrested again, this time for attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. He was sent to prison and sentenced to 5 years.
That's it?
5 years.
And he shouldn't even have been pardoned in the first place. But
5 years for trying to kill his girlfriend.
Man, he's got to be the luckiest criminal.
But he would not serve them all because Henry Moity died of a stroke in 1957 behind bars where he belonged. The location of the murders, the building at 15 Ursulines Street, is still standing today. A plain gray apartment with shuttered windows, sitting quiet on a bright, colorful block. There's a yellow one with a balcony on one side and then a salmon color one on the other. Tourists walk right past it every day, taking pictures, drinking their iced coffees, not having a clue what went on in that little apartment all those years ago. But for those of us who know, the story is very haunting, to say the least. And they actually do ghost tours over there. It's kind of crazy. But I do want to give the victims, Leonide and Theresa, the last words. They both like to write. And so Theresa wrote an article, a little poem for her children. And like I said, it was published. And so I'm going to read it. Sing a song, dear little one, to your mother's only son. That little heart shall be blessed, far better than all the rest. Comfort your little brother for the sake of your mother. Dear little one, soon he will some older grow. He'll remember you, I know. The great God whom we adore would be pleased, I am sure. So you must ever be kind. Harbor not bad thoughts in mind, dear little one.
It's like a little nursery rhyme.
I know.
A little prayer, almost.
So I do believe, I know at one time she was a really good mother. I believe New Orleans was the downfall of that family. So after the bodies were found, and the blood had been cleaned up. Investigators, they're going through what's left behind in the apartment. And tucked away in a cabinet in Leonide's bedroom, they found something small but heavy. It was a handwritten story that was folded. It still had some of her blood on it. It was sitting right beside a blood-stained rejection slip, so this did not get published. But Leonide had written it before she ever left New Iberia. It was a thinly veiled autobiography type article, told like a letter or a cautionary tale meant for young women. She tried to get it published in a women's magazine, but it never made it to print. Not until after her death. So this is what it said. In her letter, Leonide wrote about joy, about how she had found peace, how she was living poor, but she was happy with her husband and their babies back in her hometown. But as the letter goes on, her tone kind of changes and her hope fades. And it ends with a line that sounds like a woman who already knew too much about disappointment. Now to you readers, young girls especially, please think ahead and don't make mistakes that I've made, because it does not always turn out the right way. You can still be disappointed. Guess it was only my luck to be happy like this. So I warn others not to take the same risk. And then one final line, something her father had once told her. Words that now hang over this whole story like a shadow. Be careful, for marriage is a life sentence.
Wow, that's kind of ironic.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Isn't it ironic? Sorry, I didn't mean to make light of that.
But it's kind of like her marriage at that time had started to shift. Like in the beginning, it was happy, and then it was shifting, and then,
That's really sad.
Isn't it? I do believe there was some infidelity going on there, but we also have to remember Joseph, Leonide's husband, he was never, brought up. He didn't face any conspiracy to murder charges, but he never expressed any regret or sadness over the mother of his children's death. Both men were alcoholics. Both neighbors would say how they were kind of shiftless drunks. The women were taken in sewing. The only words we have to go by are their words.
Right.
Is what I'm saying. And so these women might have been a lot better than what they were made out to be.
Right. I wonder, too, the men had nothing nice to say about their wives. Some of it may have been true, but I wonder if the prostitution claim, he had accused her of having an affair with the landlord, maybe she was trying to work off some of the rent because they were poor.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think he was drinking away a lot of their money.
So maybe she's just trying to keep a roof over their head. Not that I'm excusing it, but my point is, she's not the only one to blame here, and who knows what was going on.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a really good take because I hadn't thought of that, but I do believe there was a lot of craziness on all sides. And I don't think, we always say people are not one-dimensional. They weren't just dirty,
rotten scoundrels,
low down scoundrels. There were probably reasons behind a lot of what was happening. Not excuses, but reasons.
Right. It's hard for me to reconcile a mom who would let the dad take off with those kids and just be like, I'm going to stay here. And then the other mom not feeding her children.
Right.
Like, you had some proof there that at some point she must have been a caring mother. I don't know what happened. You talked earlier about New Orleans having the bad effect for that whole family. Yeah. Bad company does corrupt good morals. We know that. And it sounds like it just all the way around. Like, it was alcoholism, living all together, just the city and the temptations that come with where they were. It just kind of all converged into a really bad ending for everybody.
For everybody. Ruined everybody's life.
Those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
Now, Darlene did a fine job in that introduction of making it sound like those folks in Louisiana speak some kind of exotic foreign language. But I think we all know that they just sound like Farmer Fran from The Waterboy. It's probably on account of all that chicory poons done slurred their speech. But here at Hard Times and True Crimes, you can pretend to speak as many languages as you want while you're hitting that subscribe button, downloading every episode, liking, sharing, buying the girls a coffee, and leaving a 5-star review. So you make sure you tell everybody you know, even if they pretend to be French, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.